thank you so much for joining us here at ACC. Even though we couldn't be in person, I'm really excited and happy that you were willing to take this interview virtually. For everyone who will be watching this, Dr. Sorrell, I just want to give a brief introduction to who you are and what we will be discussing. Okay. Um, Dr. Sorrell is the acting chief of the Division of Cardiovascular Medicine at the University of Kentucky, as you can see behind him. And he is also the acting director of the Gill Heart and Vascular Institute and chair of cardiovascular imaging. And he is also, I think, one of his big endeavors, which he is actually working on right now, is the editor in chief of the cardiovascular imaging case reports. And that is really kind of where our discussion begins because he is very active in Twitter and social media, and that's something that I think will be becoming obviously more and more um, important in this day and age. So before we begin, just do you have any opening remarks, anything you'd like to say before we dive into this discussion?
No, it's my pleasure to be here. I wish I could be there in person. I miss New Orleans and seeing everybody and collaborating, and of course, I miss the food. So I know you'll have a wonderful meeting, but I'm glad I could contribute this way.
Yes, thank you. I am a third year medical student at Rowan School of Osteopathic Medicine in New Jersey, and I'm part of the ACC student medical group as a social media ambassador. So I first got to know you through Twitter because of your very significant presence of posting case report photos and then kind of quizzing our putting nice little questions out to your community before having people really read the report or the case report. And I really have enjoyed following you for that reason. And so just to kind of kick this off, when did you first become involved in social media? When were you drawn to that platform for medical education? And what has been the most rewarding part of that for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's been a lot of fun. It's been an evolution and a learning process for myself. When I talk to my Twitter colleagues and friends out there, I'm usually the oldest one, so it's kind of something that was a real learning experience. It was probably 5, 6 years ago or so. I was at a national meeting like where you are, and somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, how come you're not on Twitter? You have all these great cases." And I said, I did sign up on Twitter like years before. I just never sent a tweet. And they said, "Okay, well, come here. Let's do a tweet right now." And we grabbed the phone and we sent a tweet together. And I remember it was very transformative because it was so simple to do. And yet it
Mhm.
was out there and available forever and ever for everybody to see. And that sort of
Mhm.
was very impactful to me. So I walked away from there. And I remember at that same time, this colleague of mine said, go slow, start slow, and don't waste too much time. Don't let it absorb your day to day. Just become, a dabbler in it and begin to see if it's something that you can make work for you or not. And I think that's an important message that I send to other people now is, Twitter or whatever platform you use, make it work for you. If it's not working for you, then change how you're using it so that it becomes the educational platform you want it to be. And we can talk more about how that works and how you can do
Mhm.
that. But I've kind of stayed on that as well. I don't spend too much time on Twitter, but people think I have they must think I spend a lot of hours on Twitter. I do not.
Yeah, I mean, digging into that a little, how many hours do you spend? Because just you have a prolific profile and there's so many great cases that you share with everyone. Kind of like, how do you budget that? I mean, you're so busy with everything else. How do you budget it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, it took me a while to learn how to do that. I think I have a process now that works pretty well, one that I could recommend to you and your, colleagues that are either getting started on this. I plan it. I plan it out in the course of the week. I usually 3 to 4 days in a week. I try to send a tweet. Um, when I got involved with the journal now a little over a year ago as the editor in chief, it provided its own forum because I have such wonderful cases from around the globe. So every time a case is dropped online and published, because it's a digital media cases,
Mhm.
then I use that immediately as a trigger to send out there. So I send my own cases, which I've always done, If there's a gap in publications for a little while, I keep my site active and people interested. And then, of course, every time Case drops a new report, I always try to take one of the interesting images from that and get it out there. And
Okay.
so, not very much, not very, I would say in the course of a week, an hour.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's very impressive considering, I mean, for someone looking at it, it might seem like it's a lot more time, but I'm also sure that over time you become more comfortable with what you're posting and kind of the format. I think that's one of the most difficult parts. And it seems like you've really taken on this kind of question based format. Have you always had that? I didn't have the opportunity to go like way, way back in your tweets. So I'm just kind of curious, what did they start as?
Yeah, really good questions. And you're right that I did spend more time. And like everything else in life, you have to prioritize where your time goes. The one commodity that every one of us have together that's the same is 24 hours in a day. And it's something I teach my faculty and my colleagues and my students all the time. How do we prioritize that 24 hours? Because that is one thing that's the same common denominator to everybody.
Mhm.
I think I've always been interested in sort of the format as an educational tool. So
Okay.
with a rounding and you're at the bedside, I ask in the form of questions, sometimes with answers, choices, sometimes without.
Mhm.
Of course, I write for ASE and for the ACC in training exam and boards exams over the years. I've always been writing questions, and so it was just a very easy format to have sort of distractors that are reasonable, because that's what makes a good question. It's not always the question, but it's the choices and the distractors. Are they reasonable? Can you be fooled into selecting them? Because that's what makes people then learn, because they pick something incorrect and they learn why they picked the incorrect option. If they got it correct, quite frankly, there's not much they learn from it.
Mhm. Right. That's definitely what we learn as, we're studying for our boards. It's like that's great. You can be happy that you knew enough to answer it properly, but why were all the other questions or why were all the other answer choices incorrect? And if
Right.
you can really explain that, that's when you're getting the most from each question. Um, yes. Okay. Well, it's inspiring to hear that you only spend about an hour and you really put together such thorough questions for us via Twitter. When you were first starting, was there kind of when you were first starting, did you expect your account to grow to almost 10 over 10,000 followers? Did you expect to have such a presence or were you really doing this for like a small group in the beginning?
Yeah, no, I'm completely flabbergasted and humbled by the number of people that I have that follow me. It's somewhat mind-boggling. The other day, I sent a tweet, and you hear the term "goes viral," and it actually did. And there were literally thousands of views, almost a minute, and it hit three quarters of a million views in 48 hours. And you're like, how is this even possible that
Right.
you see this thing just turning over? And I'm not, I have no clue to understand what the algorithms are that drive the attraction to the tweets that you send. I've never figured that out. For instance, that one that went viral, I sent three at the same time. And if you asked me to rank them, I would have put the one that went viral number three. The other two were so interesting and hardly, a few thousand people thought it was exciting, but that one took off. And so I would love to understand the algorithm better so that you could actually tap into it. I'm sure people spend a lot of time on the metrics behind this and understand it better than I do. I don't have that understanding yet. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so no, it's been completely humbling and surprising to me. I did not set out to do this. I set out to learn from a core group that I thought might want to hear what I had to say, and I continue to hear what they had to say.
Mhm. And do you find that you've been able to kind of translate your educational platform between, being a professor and then also being on Twitter? Like, how do you see a link between both of those educational platforms, I guess?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. It's something that I'm trying to continue to put a handle on and put it into the right words, right? Um,
Mhm.
you know, Clearly the trainees have changed over the last decade, especially in the last decade. Trainees now, again, as we evolve, I was a program director for many years, and what I
Okay.
saw as I was recruiting fellows in was that their way of learning continued to change, and the disparity of how they learn, the diversity across the group of learners changed. So the idea that you could hold a conference with the same PowerPoint and give a talk and have the expected knowledge transmitted the way you used to, that's gone. And so this idea that you have to do flipped classrooms, figure out how to do more bite-sized pieces of information, which is what we all learn from now, that's changed. And that's where social media, I think, has really filled in an important gap. I like to think about, the value of writing a book. It's one of the most rewarding things you do is you sit down with an idea, you prepare a book, and a year or two later, you have this wonderful physical copy of something in your library that was your idea, and it's there forever and ever. But actually, that today just makes no sense. Almost by the time that it's published, it's no longer valid. It's actually out of date. And so this idea that, science and using social media as a tool to get the conceptual ideas real time as the scientists are thinking them out to the readers and out to the audience is something that Twitter and these other social media platforms provide us. With the challenge though, right? And here's the caveat. The peer review that went into that book that I wrote was so extensive. It was an expert me who was the editor who only invited expert authors, who then I had expert oversight, who then had an expert publishing group, and then had a process to get it into print. Now, right, it's an individual who may or may not selectively choose the correct science and then get it published. And it's immediately available forever and ever. And then the peer review happens after the fact, right? It's from all the chatter that occurs on social media. And so two things can happen there. One, the social media can be very well done, and people that are chatting about it can be bringing in the appropriate peer review and supporting the comments, and everything is legit. Or, unfortunately, that chatter may be either falsely favorable, making it more impactful than it should be, or creating disinformation when it's not and it's actual science. And that's where in the pandemic we all saw this play out. I mean, suddenly, who would have thought that, vaccines could be controversial? And here they were.
Mhm. Right. There's suddenly like these blurred lines of where we're getting our information, who's saying it, who's confirming or denying it, and who actually should be speaking on the topic.
Yep. I think as a
Yeah.
science platform, we're still learning how to best utilize it.
Yeah. And I do think, an account like yours is kind of the perfect example of using it properly, right? You are pulling information, in a sense, from case reports and also your own expert knowledge to quickly disseminate to everyone. And I think using it that way is the most responsible way to use it. I think if people want to use it in a way where, they're kind of sharing opinions or more so like an N of one, right? If that's what we're sharing on Twitter, then it needs to be very apparent, right? It needs to be very transparent is the right word, excuse me. So that everyone knows kind of what kind of information they're ingesting in that moment, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So hopefully I kind of think that is where we're heading. Um, Slowly and surely as we have more accounts like yours on there. And we can just, really continue to learn from them. So thank you so much for joining us. I think that is really most of the questions I have for you. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your Saturday. I hope that the power goes back on in Kentucky for you. There any kind of like parting last words that you'd like to say to our listeners or anything else you'd like to say before we sign off here?
Yeah, I guess I will. I'll leave one piece of advice, something that I have to watch over, and I think something that people who are new to this and are trying to get excited about the forum may not understand how to anonymize an image carefully. And I think it's really so critical that we just stop. I see out there all the time personal health information that's getting online, and it tears at my heart. And I think again, we as the leaders need to remind every opportunity that we have, you not only mask the name, but you need to mask the site, the institution, the date, the time, anything that could be identifiable. And another piece that I think is meaningful, and you may not appreciate it, is you have this great case that's really rare that comes in your institution. Don't tweet about it now. Wait for months to go by, then do it. Because again, you don't want to link the person individually who's being evaluated with that rare disease out there on social media, because it could come back around to them as well. So try to have that delay, that time delay, even though you're excited and you want to send it out there and share it. Try to hold off, and because I think it's another layer of protection that we have control over.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's really important to keep in mind. At the end of the day, keeping patient health information private and making sure that we're doing right by the patient is the most important part, even if it's exciting and we want to get it out there. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that and for reminding us. Thank you so much for joining us today. For everyone listening right now, or who will be listening, if you would like more videos like this, you can visit our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/fitsonthego. And this interview will be posted there very shortly. So thank you so much for joining us. And I hope we can connect again.
Okay, all the best. Good luck to you.